Welcome to this lecture on the chakras and the Bija mantras. My name is Cyan Pascal and I am the founder of the Light Collective. We are an online yoga school. We run yoga teacher trainings, and really this work that I'm teaching online now for free is coming like as an excerpt from our 200-hour yoga teacher training and method, which is an advanced yoga teacher training, which is open to also non-teachers. And so these kind of mini lectures are trying to support people who are really wanting to understand the traditional chakra system as it was taught by the ancient tantrikas. And this information has been like relatively new for me over the last couple of years since this was published. So if you're interested in kind of diving into maybe more tantric philosophy, ideas around yoga and practices that are about pranayama, mantra, then I invite you to click subscribe below, because we do our best to kind of disseminate as much information as possible. And if you're wanting to go even deeper, then you can always join one of our yoga teacher trainings as well. This particular lecture is probably going to really only attract people who have kind of gone into the chakras with a bit of depth. So maybe you are a yoga teacher, maybe you have just done your teacher training, or you're wanting to, or you're kind of wanting to put together a workshop, or you're doing mantra work and you're wanting to do some mantras for the chakras. What I will say in this lecture was one of the things that fundamentally rocked me a few years ago and what led me to retrain in the classical tantric system. Basically, in my yoga teacher trainings in India, across both Indian, Western teachings, I was always taught the same thing about the Bija mantras, or the seed sounds for each of the chakras. And I was told that at the root it was Lam, Sacral Vam, Navel Ram, Heart Yum, Throat Hum, Third Eye Om, and the crown was maybe a silent Om. And I taught this, and it was beautiful, and I loved working with it, and my students loved working with it, and working with mantras was very powerful. And then I recently found out that this teaching is fundamentally incorrect. So what I want to do in this lecture is talk about why this is incorrect. And also, before we get into that, to just say that if you're somebody who is wanting to work with mantras, this is a really good start. Okay, so the fundamental practice of working with the chakras from the ancient classical tradition was to work with mantra. So you're onto a good thing, okay? So don't give up now, even if maybe you've been teaching it or learning about it in a way that isn't correct. What is incorrect about this teaching, or what makes it, I should say, inaccurate from a classical tantric perspective? The mistake that has been made in the last 100 years is to assume that these Bija mantras, as they are found in the texts, relate to the chakras. So they, in fact, across all texts, as they were written, these sacred Bija mantras, so if you're wanting to work with a sacred Bija mantra, you're obviously somebody who is in some way wanting to kind of go back to a source text. You're somebody who is probably interested in accuracy if you're working with the Sanskrit tradition. And these Bija mantras weren't related to the chakras. The Bija mantras were related to the 5 elements. So the Lam was earth, the Vam was for water, the Ram was for fire, the Yum was for wind, and the Hum was for space. Now, what happened in the last 100 years was, because of the way information has been inaccurately spread about the chakras, and many systems of the chakras have kind of been cemented together, because you will place an element in a chakra as part of the traditional system, it's sort of been shifted to say that, the element of, say, earth is only related to the root chakra, for example. And so this mantra isn't related to the earth element, it's related to the root chakra. So this is problematic because it's fundamentally incorrect. The Bija mantras relate to the elements. The second thing that we can note is that the elements weren't fixed to any particular chakra. And within the New Age system, that is a whole thing the last 100 years, that the elements are in some way fixed to the chakras. When you work with the tantric classical system, in fact, there is a lot more flexibility. So if you're really wanting to kind of ground in your heart, you could work with a system where the lowest chakra is the earth element at the heart, and you could work with water at the throat, you could work with fire at the palate, you could work with wind at the third eye, and space at the crown, for example. And that would be a 5 chakra system. And you can go back and have a watch over the 7 chakras of the body lecture, which describes a bit more about that, the practices, the different quantities of chakras across the different traditions. So there is a sense that, first of all, the Bija mantras are for the elements. The elements aren't fixed to the chakras, that you can move them around. But in the tradition, they were generally always in that order of earth, water, fire, wind, and space. Which is good, because if you want to move the elements around, maybe you want to get like really grounded, like in your heart, as I said, and be really grounded in your relationships and your love life. Or maybe you want to create, a kind of fiery quality in your voice so that you can be courageous in the way that you speak. There might be different intentions as to why you would want different elements in different chakras. So we've got, this is the first part of this inaccuracy when it comes to the way the Bija mantras are taught. The second half of this inaccuracy is that we've been given a base level of mantra. Sometimes it's described as an exoteric mantra, but depending on the Sanskrit scholar that you learn from. So there are kind of 2 that I learn from, and the one that I work more closely with, who has gone very deeply, like his PhD thesis is on the chakras, his name is Christopher Tompkins. He has found that the way these tantric texts have been written is basically in a kind of code, and nothing is given easily. So there is a sense that a lot of the teachings are in some way hidden, so that, and you might have heard this already, so that the teacher is able to explain the different keys to the student. So the way they would do this is through complex systems of cross-referencing. They'd give you maybe a reference to the Sanskrit letter. They'd give you a reference to part of the bija. They would say the sound at the end sounds like, and they'd use an analogy like 1,000 humming bees. They would cross-reference other texts, and they would often use other analogies, sleeping serpent coiled, which related, to something that made sense at the time but would be anachronistic now. So it's hard for us to decipher. It was hard for the yogis at the time to decipher. That's why they did it, so that you could only do it with a qualified teacher to initiate you. And so because there was this complex codification that happened across the tantric texts, even these bija mantras, lam, vam, ram, yam, hum, are, according to certain scholars, not necessarily even correct. There are more accurate bijas, and we teach a kind of base version of it within the TLC method of the accurate bijas for the elements. And there are full, complete versions that you really need to be initiated into, because they're extremely powerful. But they aren't lum, vum, rum, yum, hum, and om. They're close to them, but they're different. Some of the vowels are different, some of the starts are different, and the ends are different. So it kind of sounds like they're all just totally different. And this is interesting because what happened was that codified language in the text, when it was first translated 100 years ago by Western scholars, there was no cross-referencing of texts. There was no sense that there was a codification happening in the texts. And so when these Bija mantras started to be published in the West, they were also pretty new to India because Tantra had been so underground for so long. It wasn't like it was common knowledge in India either. So it was very hidden, the tantric tradition. So when it was mistranslated in the West, it also spread back to India, and there's been this cross-pollination of ideas for the last couple of 100 years. So you'll find that these Bija mantras, you'll find them on the web, you'll find them in Indian schools from Indian teachers, you'll find them in your yoga teacher trainings, but actually what is starting to be discovered, like really recently, which is actually really exciting, is a more accurate understanding of what those mantras were. Unfortunately, because of the way tantric history has gone, and you can watch over our kind of short history into the chakras, which talks a little bit about tantra, we haven't had 1,000 years of commentaries and open discussion on the tantric texts in the same way that, say, previous traditions like the Vedic tradition, we've had 2,000 years of yogis in India and, you know, in the last few hundred years in the West, as we've discovered these Vedic texts, to comment, to translate, to cross-reference. There is so much more study on the Vedas than there are on the Tantras. And we're really at a kind of birth point of understanding the Tantras. So you won't be able to find really any of the information that we've given on the chakras in these 7 lectures online, in published books, either in India or in the West. If you know of some published texts, let us know. There are a couple from some Sanskrit scholars who are working in the US now who are starting to uncover the tantric texts and are very passionate, incredible teachers. And we're so lucky to have them. But it's pretty hard to get this information. But the exciting thing is that we can start to understand the chakras more accurately. And maybe your starting point is just to watch over the 7 different lectures that we've created here on YouTube to understand some of the common misconceptions of the chakras and some of the tantric tradition, what has happened. And then maybe you might find yourself going down the track of doing a yoga teacher training with ourselves or with some of the other tantric teachers that are starting to kind of create more content that relates to the tantric tradition. So this is the last in our series of lectures on the chakras. If you haven't already watched over our previous lectures, then I highly recommend you do so. And if you are interested in this kind of content, definitely subscribe below or leave your comments there too. Thank you, yogis, for your time. I appreciate it.